Hey, good day, Stewart's Chapel. This is Brother Don Pierson here in Don Counts, and this is Monday's devotion. Monday's devotion. We're here at the church's office and doing a few devotions here this week. I want to start a new series as we go into the new year, and what I'm calling this series, it's a series of at least 14 devotions, and I'm calling this series Walking Worthy of Our Calling in the Next Year. Walking Worthy of Our Calling in the Next Year. And the scripture will be familiar to some of you. We've looked at it in some of our home Bible studies, and it has stayed with me. And so this will set the foundation for the other devotions. So Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1, 2, and 3. I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you were called, with all lowliness. And the word all there is implied to be for each of the following necessities: with all lowliness, with all gentleness, with all longsuffering, with all bearing with one another in love, and with all endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. And so Paul is a prisoner. He describes himself in that way, and that kind of sets the tone. But it also qualifies him to bring forth this challenge to walk worthy of your calling. Because Paul, you see, is in prison because he has been walking worthy of the calling by which he has received from the Lord. Now, anytime you hear the word calling in Scripture, or someone talks to you about calling, you need to think about it in two categories. I'll give you two S's. The first category is a specific calling. Now, Paul's specific calling was that he was called to be a missionary to the Gentiles. That was his very specific calling. For me, my specific calling is to be the pastor at Stewart's Chapel. So there's a specific calling. Now, the problem is most of us, when we hear the word calling, that's all we think about. We think specific calling. And so it's not unusual when a pastor preaches or teaches on calling that someone says, well, I don't know what my calling is. And the reason they're able to say that is because they're thinking of the first category, that first box, specific calling. Well, that's not the only calling. There is a shared calling. So those are the two S's, a specific calling and a shared calling. The shared calling is a common calling, or the universal calling that every Christian has. And that universal, common, shared calling that we all have as Christian is to serve Christ, to follow Christ with all our heart, to love the Lord with all our heart, with all our strength, with all our soul, and with all our mind. That is the calling for all Christians, to live faithful to the Lord. That is the shared calling. Now, Paul is writing to the Ephesians, who are Gentiles, who have become believers, and so he's not talking to them, telling them in relationship to walk worthy to their specific calling, even though it can be applied that. He's primarily talking to the whole body of believers, saying, look, you all walk worthy of the calling of following Christ. In other words, you keep on going, you don't look back, you stay faithful to your calling. That's what he's talking about. Well, if I were to ask you what it looked like to walk worthy of your calling, of the shared calling, the common calling, you might say things, well, that means I need to worship Him. That means I need to study His Word. That means I need to live in a pure and holy way, unspotted, unblemished from the world. You probably could go on and on and on in relationship to that. But that's not what comes next, and that's the surprise here. You see, we are so focused on the doing that often we miss what God is really looking at, and that's the being. We get so absorbed in the doing, especially in the American Christian culture. We have created this list. Even though we know we're not supposed to do that, we still seem to have that list in our mind of all the things that I need to do as a Christian. But you see, we are first called to be something. And so when Paul goes from telling them to walk worthy of their calling, the very next thing he says deals with what they are to be. And basically what he's going to say, if you are what you are supposed to be, then you will have no problem doing what you're supposed to do. It doesn't work the other way. You can do all of the doing and still not be. So he calls attention to the being. So what does it look like to walk worthy of my calling in this coming year? Well, I must walk worthy in a way where it's all lowliness. In other words, I need to keep in mind that who is above me. I need to put myself in the proper place where God is first, others are next, and I'm last. In other words, I got to die to myself. I got to live in a manner where I don't exalt self, where I exalt others, where I'm edifying others. I walk with all lowliness. I walk humbly. I walk in a state. If I'm going to live worthy of my calling, if you're going to live worthy in the next year, then you and I have to die to self. And we have to put Him first and others next. The other thing is we have to do that with all gentleness, because he's setting you up for the third thing. And the third one is with all long suffering. In other words, when you and I walk worthy of our calling, really walk worthy of our calling, and we are, when we be low and humble, when we have Christ first and others second, when we do that, guess what's going to happen? People are going to take advantage of us. People are going to walk all over us. You're going to suffer. And you know what he tells you to do? Because the sufferings come, you better do it gently. You better not retaliate. You better be gentle. Now, I've already figured out I'm going to have a hard time this next year in walking worthy of Him. Because walking lowly is everything against my nature. But here's the thing. I'm supposed to have a new nature. And the new nature demands that I die to self. So walking lowly should come spiritually natural, but it doesn't come physically natural. Walking lowly and gentle in the midst of suffering doesn't come natural for the old self, but it should be part of the new self. So walking worthy in this new year of my calling, that is my calling to follow Christ no matter what, I need to do it humbly, lowly. I need to do it gently. I need to do it with long suffering. And I need to do it with all forbearance in a state of love towards those around me. You know, it does help. When you have love, you can endure much. You can have patience. You can have long suffering a lot easier when you love those that are causing you pain and torment. And then he says, with all endeavoring. In other words, you're going to have to work at this. You're going to have to work at it. Now, what are you working at? You're not working at being lowliness. You're not working at gentle. You're not working at long suffering. You're not working at forbearing. You're working at keeping. You've got to guard something. Well, what? The unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Now, here's the awakening that took place over the last few months as I have taught this section of Scripture. It is this verse 3. What is this? I know what I've been taught and I read, but this is what God has spoken to me. Don Pierson, if you're going to walk worthy of me, of the calling that I have given you this next year, everything in you is not going to want that. You're not going to want to be lowly. You're not going to want to be gentle. You're not going to want to be long-suffering. You're not going to want to bear with the other people in love. But when you don't, the Spirit that is in you will come. He will call you to yield. He will invite you to endeavor to keep Him where He needs to be. And Don Pierson, when you don't do that, you will create conflict in you. You will create an absence of peace because the unity of your spirit with the Spirit of God will be divided. And you know what? I don't want to go through a day. I don't want to go through a month. I don't want to go a year. I don't want to go my life with that. I am to endeavor to yield to the Spirit that desires for me to walk worthy of my calling with all lowliness, all gentleness, all long-suffering, all forbearing, with love. I want to keep that peace in me. Because when that peace is there, I smile a lot more. You know why? Because I understand that my Lord is pleased with me. Love you, Stewart's Chapel.